Was James I of Aragon, the son of Peter II of Aragon? This is an episode that occurred in the Middle Ages, which we could see today in one of the gossip programs of the gossip press. The conception of James I of Aragon was shrouded in legend, and although it was said to have been a miracle of God, there were always more than reasonable doubts about his paternity. These are portraits painted many years after his death, so don't try to look for resemblances. However, in the chronicle of the medieval Catalan historian Bernat Desclot, there is a detailed description of James I.
James was the most beautiful man in the world. He was taller than any other man a span, and he was very well formed and whole in all his limbs. He had a large and red and healthy face, and a long and very straight nose, and a large mouth and well made, and large teeth and very white as if they were pearls, and black eyes and blonde hair, like gold thread, and big shoulders, and long and slender body, and thick and well-made arms, and beautiful hands, and long fingers, and thick and well-made thighs, and long and straight and thick legs by their measures, and long and well-made and delicately shod feet.
To put us in context, I will explain the situation in which this part of Europe was at that time. We are in the year 1207, and this is the territorial situation in this part of Europe. The Crown of Aragon is facing a really serious problem. Peter II of Aragon has been married to Mary of Montpellier for 3 years, and they have not yet had any offspring. This makes his subjects very nervous because the king could die without offspring and put the stability of the kingdom in serious trouble. So the queen and her advisors meet in Montpellier. The conception of James I is shrouded in legend. His father, Peter II of Aragon, does not want to lie with his wife, Mary of Montpellier, which worries everyone because of the lack of an heir. So from Montpellier, they devise a stratagem to deceive the king and to get him to lie with the queen. Peter II has a reputation of impulsive, drinker, and womanizer. When the king is in Lattes, near Montpellier, to visit one of his mistresses, he is convinced to move to another town where the queen is, with the lie that his mistress is waiting for him there. Meanwhile, the queen and her vassals prepare the trap. Once the king was in the bedroom with his supposed lover, who in reality would be the queen. At the door of the bedroom they would be stationed, as the Catalan historian and knight Ramon Muntaner writes in his chronicle.
12 consuls, and among knights and other citizens, we shall have another 10 of the best of Montpellier and of her barony. And there shall be there the Queen Miss Mary, with 12 duennas of the most honored of Montpellier, and with 12 maidens. And she shall go with us before the said Lord King, and there shall come with us 2 notaries, the best of Montpellier, and the bishop's officer, and 2 canons, and 4 good religious. And each man and each duenna or maiden shall bring in her hand a candle, which they shall light when the said Queen Miss Mary enters the chamber with the Lord King. And at the door of the said chamber they shall all be together until dawn.
The mistress is taken to the king's chamber. One of the conditions set by the supposed mistress is that there should be no light so as not to be seen by anyone. So when the king is in his bedroom, the mistress enters in the darkness. And in this crazy night, the future James I is engendered. At dawn they all enter the chamber and ask the king to recognize the woman lying next to him. The king's face is a poem, first when he sees all these people entering the bedroom, where he is with his mistress, and then discovering that his mistress is in fact the queen. If the queen had had a cell phone, she could have taken a selfie of herself and the king's stupid face in the background. It would have been top trending throughout the Crown of Aragon and the rest of Europe. The king has no choice but to recognize the queen and pray that the purpose of the nobles, to have an heir, is fulfilled. But the king's annoyance is great. That same day he takes his horse and gallops out of the city. 9 months later his son, the future James I, is born. Peter too does not see his son until he is 2 years old, and when he is 3 years old, he sends him under the tutelage of Simon de Montfort, because the marriage of James with the daughter of the Lord of Montfort, Amicia, was agreed. James is confined in the castle of Cascassin, owned by Simon de Montfort, until he turns 18 and marries Amicia. As you can see, the king does not seem to be particularly fond of his son. Perhaps he suspects something? As I have said before, Peter II of Aragon is a drunkard and a womanizer. His drunkenness and running around the bedchambers of different damsels are commonplace. However, apart from James I, he has no other legitimate children, unlike his supposed son James, although it seems that he had illegitimate children with some damsels. Peter II had with Mary of Montpellier his only legitimate son, James. Although it seems that he had illegitimate children with several women of unknown name, although this information is a little confusing. The descendants of James I are more extensive and better documented. He married for the first time with Leonor of Castile when he was 13 years old and she was 29 years old. A year later they had a son, Alfonso. With his second wife, Violante of Hungary, he had 9 children, plus another 6 documented illegitimate children with 4 different women. So we have Peter II, an inveterate womanizer, according to the words of his own son.
Era homme de fembres.
That he has no legitimate son other than James, begotten in a crazy night, in which the king was probably drunk. The indifference he seems to feel towards his son is evident. He does not see James until he is 2 years old, and when he is only 3 years old, he leaves him under the guardianship of Simon de Montfort. 2 years later, when James is 5 years old, Peter II of Aragon goes to war with Simon de Montfort, despite the fact that his son is in the power of the Lord of Montfort. On the morning of the Battle of Muret, Peter attends Mass. The night before, he spent the night partying with a damsel, and he is so drunk that they have to put him in a chair because he can't stand up. At one point during the battle, Peter sees Simon de Montfort fleeing with some of his knights. Peter takes his weapons, gets on his horse, and rides off in pursuit. With him are only 20 knights, because the others have not had time to prepare, but he rides so fast that he soon leaves them behind. When he is close to Montfort's group, they recognize him, turn, and surround him. After a short fight, Peter II of Aragon is killed. When his knights arrive, they can only pick up his corpse. The Battle of Muret was over. Now, the heir to the crown of Aragon is in the possession of Simon of Montfort, which puts the kingdom in a very complicated situation. We may ask ourselves if this is the act of a desperate father who knows that if Simon of Montfort manages to escape, his son's life will be in danger. Or is it the action of an impulsive fool? As I have already said, Peter II never seemed to feel a special affection for his son. He did not see him until he was 2 years old, and soon after he confined him in the castle of the Lord of Montfort, with whom he would later enter into battle. And given his repeated attempts to annul his marriage to Marie of Montpellier, something the Pope refused to do, perhaps the fate of his son was something that mattered very little to him. It could even be one more obstacle for the Pope to finally grant him the annulment. Knowing the womanizing nature of Peter II, and with the only legitimate offspring of James, begotten of the relationship of a single knight, it seems doubtful that James I was the son of Peter II. His supposed father was not very fond of him, to say the least, and after his father's death, his paternal uncles did not show any affection for their nephew either, quite the contrary. He had an assassination attempt when he was still a baby, and during his childhood he endured the contempt of his paternal family and was even kidnapped by his relatives. In the Middle Ages, people were quite ignorant and easily manipulated, but they were not stupid. A child conceived in the relationship of a single night and in such strange circumstances that the queen said it was God's will. You can believe it or not, but I suspect her paternal family had more than reasonable doubts. What his uncles proposed was that James would keep his mother's possessions in Montpellier and that they would divide the crown of Aragon. Fortunately, his uncles did not succeed in their purpose, and James I became one of the great kings in the history of Europe.